Welcome again to EDU510. In this course, not surprisingly, we're going to explore the fundamentals of educational research, because that's what it's called. But what does it mean to do research? How is that different than any other information gathering activity we may engage in? How can we ensure our actions are ethical as researchers? How do we actually do research, and for what purpose? We're going to begin this exploration of all of these questions in Module 1. And by the end of the course, my goal is that you will feel much more confident about your ability to pursue your research question thoughtfully, knowledgeably, and ethically. During this module, you'll read the first chapter of the Creswell and Guterman text, as well as pages 154 to 159 in Marshall, Rossman, and Blanco. You will also read an article by Baker in which she explores observation as a research method. It's one of very, very few articles, in fact, about observation, and is excellent. In order to become familiar with one of the key skills of a good researcher, observation, your first assignment will be to complete Part A of the observation assignment. Your instructions are minimal on purpose so that you experience, in a small way, the kinds of decisions a researcher must make. Once that's complete, I'm going to post instructions for Part B of the assignment, and the reasons for this mystery will become clear at that point. I would say that you don't need to rush to read all of the readings before you do the Part A of the assignment. In fact, it's probably better if you don't. And because we have such a short timeline between the time when the course starts and when that assignment is due, you're not going to have much time to do it anyway. So don't worry about that. In the next week of Module 1, you'll have an opportunity to finish up those readings and use them in Part B of that assignment, just as a kind of aside here. So to help us in the task of doing this assignment, among lots of other things, we will be using two main texts as well as required readings and videos throughout the course. I always like to know a little bit about the scholars that I'm reading, so let's explore the authors of our text first. Three authors have contributed to the 7th edition of Designing Qualitative Research: Catherine Marshall, Gretchen Rossman, and Gerardo Blanco. Marshall is the William Eves Distinguished Emerita Professor in Leadership and Policy, who spent many years teaching and researching at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. The focus of her work has been an interdisciplinary approach to study school cultures, state policy cultures, as well as gender and social justice issues. I've personally found her scholarship not only extraordinarily useful in my own scholarship, and I'm one of legions of scholars who have benefited from her scholarship in the politics of education and educational administration and leadership, and her many awards attest to that fact. There are many of us out there who are very beholden to Catherine Marshall and the work that she's done. Rossman was actually one of Marshall's students, and her interests center around educational reform internationally and domestically, particularly in higher education. She is also recognized internationally for her expertise in qualitative research methodology. Blanco, who is originally from Mexico, was a student of Rossman's and, like her, has a keen interest in international education. He is keenly interested in global social justice and is interested in how higher education institutions define, improve, and communicate their value to stakeholder groups. He's consulted internationally and worked with many countries in developing quality standards for higher education, and has lived as well as researched the experience of international students who study in the U.S. All are recognized as outstanding qualitative research practitioners and scholars. In our second text, and a very important one, is the one written by Creswell and Guterman. John Creswell was for years a professor of educational psychology at the University of Nebraska, a discipline that is largely informed by quantitative analysis, and there is sort of a bent towards quantitative analysis in their text, because both of them have participated heavily in quantitative analysis. But he saw the usefulness of qualitative work to expand on and fill in the gaps of quantitative research, and was the first and most influential proponent of what he called mixed methods. He developed a conceptual and theoretical framework for mixed methods, and it's an approach that has been taken up in many academic disciplines because of its utility and its ability to provide a more fulsome exploration of the phenomenon. Creswell is now an adjunct professor at the University of Michigan and works with medical faculty to teach mixed methods as well as consult nationally and internationally. Tim Guterman is also a specialist in mixed methodology and works across disciplines and internationally with collaborators in mixed methods. He is particularly interested in research at the intersection of health and education and the improvement of health services. Couldn't we use him these days? I tried to find out more about Linda M. Baker, the author of the excellent article on observation as a research method, but even deep into a Google search, I just couldn't find a picture or a whole lot about her. However, I do know, and we do find out in Google, that she did or does teach in the School of Library and Information Science at Wayne State in Michigan. And she has a very active research history in information finding in health sciences and social sciences, particularly information communication between doctors and patients, with an emphasis on patients with multiple sclerosis. She's also, interestingly, published several books with international scholars looking at information-seeking behaviors and the needs of sex workers. The article we'll be looking at is a rich and deeply researched paper on observation as a methodology, and it's really one of the best I've ever seen. So let's have a look at what these authors help us to understand more fully about the nature and practice of research, as well as observation as a method for collecting data. And I should say that my videos often take kind of a bird's eye view. So these aren't enough to provide you with all of the information you need, but we'll kind of provide the outlines or the high points for some of the things that you'll be reading in the assigned readings and videos and so on. At the heart of the course are three questions. What is research? And implied by that question, what is not research? And how do you do it well? As Creswell and Guterman argue, and Marshall et al. Reiterate, research is a systematically, theoretically informed, and ethical examination of a particular phenomenon in a social context. As educators, our primary interest is in educational practices, organizations, and stakeholders, and often the interactions between them. As we'll learn in the third module in much more detail, research practices and approaches are informed by theories that inform the methods used to explore the social phenomenon under inquiry. And we'll talk about those theories, and they'll become important, much more important to us as we go through the course. But research is not merely opinion. It's not simply reporting. It's not common sense. Although there are elements of all of that in research, it's more than that. Research may confirm previous knowledge, like what we might call common sense, but it offers opportunities for seeing things differently, things that we've taken as an assumption or as it's always been. And it helps us to understand more deeply and in a more complex way. Research is an approach, is a process that involves multiple steps that are not necessarily linear, but do build on one another over time. And these steps are used to analyze information to increase our understanding of the topic or issue. So Creswell and Guterman talk to us about some of the steps that most often we'll find in research. And Marshall, Rossman, and Blanco provide us with a really good picture of how complex and nonlinear those steps often are. So one of those steps is identifying the problem. The second is posing a question. It comes out of that problem. And I think even before identifying a problem, we could say identifying an area of research. So what's our general area of research? And we'll talk about that more in Module 2. And then we identify the problem within that area of research, the question that becomes important for us to look at. So we're narrowing our focus as we go. And then we review the literature. What does literature say about the question that we want to explore? And then we specify the purpose for our research. What do we want to find out? And then we collect the data. We then analyze and interpret that data, and then we report on and evaluate the research. And then we start a whole circle again around what we've found. The last question we need to consider at this point is, why should we research at all? I'm sure you could add to this list that I'm going to be talking about in a moment, but here are some thoughts about the purposes of research, particularly educational research. So one of the issues that are important for us to think about is that research helps us to understand the world in which we live. It may tell us how it's organized, how our actions affect others, how we can live well with others, how we can come to know the other, how we can work more efficiently and more effectively in that complex context that we've talked about in the other sections above. Research can also help us to develop effective policies and governance, and you can kind of see my bias here coming out of ed policy studies, but it helps us at the local, provincial, national, and international level to achieve a sense of what is the common good through social institutions by doing careful research and critique of what it is that is commonly accepted as the good. And then it helps us to consider our practices at various institutional levels. The effectiveness and efficiency of those various institutional levels and the practices within them, and what it's like to experience those practices. So we can think of that, for example, in relation to racialized groups, for example, or different class groups and so on. How do they experience? Because oftentimes their voices aren't heard in more general conversation around things that are happening in the world in which we live. It can also help us to explore at all of the micro, that is, your classroom or a small reading group within your classroom, or a grade division, for example, within a school. It can help us to explore at the meso level. So that could be at the school level or at a community level. And certainly at the macro level. So that could be at the provincial level, or it could be at the federal level, depending on the country that you're talking about and so on. Of course, research can happen anywhere. And as the Baker and Marshall, Rossman and Blanco readings demonstrate, one of the most common forms of research is observation. With all of this in mind, then, how might we understand observation as a research approach? Well, observation is the action or process of observing something or someone carefully, or in order to gain information. For example, she was brought into the hospital for observation. So rather than just going home and lying in bed and having somebody bring her aspirin, there was seen as a need for much more expert observation of what was going on so that, a diagnosis could be made. Some similar words with similar meanings to observation are to watch, to monitor, to scrutinize, to examine, to inspect, view, survey, pay attention to, consider, study, review, and so on. So this gives us a sense of what observation is. And observation is exactly what you're going to be doing for your first assignment, observation part A. So you'll find the information for that in the Submit Your Assignment section of eClass. And if you have any questions after you've read through the assignment about the location for your observation activity, please let me know, or anything about the assignment for that matter, but please let me know if you're having some issues around your location, because the assignment does come up pretty quickly after the start of the class. So class starts on Thursday and you need to be doing observation over the weekend. So if you have any questions, let me know right away. This is the observation assignment is actually always a fun and enlightening assignment, I found, with all of the classes that I've taught. So all the best as you enter into this assignment, all the best as you enter into this course, and I'm really looking forward to what comes from this. There will be a second video as well when we get to part B, and it will go into more detail about some of the things we've talked about here. All the best.